I'm Julie Evans. I'm the executive director of Roots and Roads, and we're so glad to have you with us tonight for, gosh, what month are we in? Our fourth installment of our 2026 series. And tonight we are with Dr. Hannig from, I think, hopefully you saw this in the chat, all the way from Germany, where it's now 3:06 a.m. So she is just won a special place in my heart for getting up to be here with us. And next slide, Jen. I don't know that I can forward. Thank you so much. I'm just going to quickly go over the controls. So up in the right hand, you'll see a little view box. That's where you can toggle between if you just want to see the speaker, if you want to see everybody else who's in the room, you do that there. Mute and unmute will be down on your left. Start, stop video, that's where your camera works. So if you're not currently on the screen, but you would like to be on the screen, that's where you would click that start, stop video. The chat there in the middle is where you just drop any questions or if you're having technical difficulties. And then the little heart for React, that's where you can send up hearts, you can raise your hand for a question, give a thumbs up to something that you love. Oh, yep. And okay, I think that is it. On to the next slide, please. So I know that we know most of you, but for anyone who's new here, Roots and Roads is a nonprofit here in Tucson, Arizona. We have a few primary things we do. One that's very behind the scenes is we provide financial support for low-income hospice patients and their families for basic needs that are not covered by health insurance, of which there are many, especially when people have to stop working due to illness and due to caregiving. The more public-facing thing we do is community education around end-of-life issues, which is what we're here for tonight. And then another way we do education is through our Roots and Roads website. We have a section on there called the Crosswalk, which takes people from time of diagnosis of serious illness all the way through death and bereavement to everything in between. We were just trying to pull resources into one place so that when time is of the essence, people aren't having to run around trying to find the information that they need to make the best decisions for themselves and their loved ones. Next slide, please. Yes, special thank you so much to our individual donors, Jim, Amy, Lindsay, Linda, Melissa, Martha, Susan B. We are so grateful for you. Your support of these sessions helped underwrite the cost, the Zoom cost, if there's a presenter stipend, the time it takes us to put together the slides, all of that good stuff. So thank you so much for making that possible. And I will now turn it over to our Director of Community Engagement, David Fife.
Thanks so much, Julie. And we also want to take a moment and thank our series sponsors. You can see them listed here. We have Sunset Hospice and Hospice of the Valley, Casa de la Luz Hospice, Pima Council on Aging, and Right at Home in-home care and assistance. We are so grateful to all of these organizations who have been long-term partners with Roots and Roads. And we are grateful that they help make it possible for us to provide this education free of charge to the whole community. And now we are going to turn our attention to tonight's session. It was a few years ago that I read Anita Hannig's book, The Day I Die, The Untold Story of Assisted Dying in America. If you haven't picked it up yet, I highly recommend it to you. Through her careful research, Anita shares the deeply personal stories of individuals who decide to seek medical aid in dying after receiving a terminal diagnosis. And she shares the stories of the clinicians who accompany people through the decision to hasten their own death. Then last summer, Anita and I had some phone conversations to discuss the possibility of her participating in this year's series. And originally, when we called one another, I thought that she would speak about her book, but then through our discussions, it was clear that her current passion and attention had taken her in a different direction. In tonight's session, Anita will reflect on how speaking thoughtfully with kids about our shared mortality may equip them with the tools and frameworks to navigate life's unavoidable losses. We're so grateful that Anita can be with us. As Julie mentioned, it is the middle of the night in Germany. And so if she yawns a few times during her own presentation, we're not going to say a word. We're just going to know what's going on for her. But Anita, thank you. Thank you for being here with us. And we're going to turn things over to you now.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Julie. Thanks so much for having me and for welcoming me to this beautiful community. Let me share my screen. So my talk today, oh, first of all, happy April 16th. Today is National Healthcare Decisions Day, which is a day to honor the significance of end-of-life planning and healthcare decisions. So this is very apropos, my presentation. So my talk today is titled From the Ground Up, Raising Death Literate Children. And throughout this talk, I am going to use my poor daughter, who's sleeping right now, as my n equals 1 for making a case for raising death literate children. And I hope she will forgive me. And if there's any disturbance, I might have to go check on her real quick. But hopefully she will be sleeping through this. In whatever shape or form you have children or young people in your lives, as a parent, a grandparent, or an educator, I hope you will find something of value in tonight's talk. So, I want to start by reading a little excerpt from an article I published about 6 months ago. This came out in Cognoscenti, the WBUR Boston's opinion page, and I'll be drawing on some of this article throughout my presentation. So I want to kind of set the scene by starting out the way I started out this article, which was called My Toddler Likes to Talk About Death, So Do I. All right, here we go. And everybody can hear me okay? Yes, okay. Every now and again, my 3-year-old daughter asks me how old I am, and she's now 4, and I'm also aged. 43, I say, smiling, already anticipating her next question. Is that old? By now, I know why she asks. My daughter has come to realize that old people eventually die, and she's trying to work out how much time we have left together. I assure her that though 43 isn't young, it's not that old yet. Satisfied, if only for the moment, she returns to her play. So how did we get here? How did I come to raise a child so attuned to death? Not on purpose, but also not on purpose. So it might be helpful to know a few things about my professional background. I'm trained as a cultural anthropologist, studying the end of life. And I spent about 10 years teaching college classes on medicine, religion, and death and dying. And I see one of my former students here who's also now a colleague. Hi, Doug. And about 10 years ago, I began researching a book on medical aid and dying, and researching and writing, I should say. And David already mentioned it. It's The Day I Die, the untold story of assisted dying in America. And doing that research, I made several observations, which are not going to be news to this crowd who's very well versed in end-of-life matters. So in much of the US, death continues to happen at a distance. That means we've outsourced death to the fairly sanitized realm of medical systems, of the funeral industry. Fear and denial continue to mark our cultural engagement with death very generally. I'm making big generalizations here. Families rarely take care of their own dead. And there's really this pervasive discomfort with talking about our mortality and really engaging in it. And all of this is, of course, made easier by a life extending industry that, peddles myths of youth and staying youthful and prolonging your life digitally and physically and otherwise. So doing my research, I was initiated into the world of people, and they mostly tended to be women, who work in the presence of death professionally. So I'm talking about hospice nurses, morticians, death doulas, assisted dying volunteers who accompany people during their final months of life. And because I was so immersed in this community, and I was, already convinced that we need to talk about death more freely, I have let these conversations and that focus really become a part of my parenting. And that just kind of happened naturally, but I've never come to regret it. So my daughter is growing up in a household that has a lot of death-related imagery in it. So on the left here, we have a skeleton marinating in a bathtub. This was a gift by one of my girlfriends for my birthday one year. My book covers have various death-related imagery on them. We read a lot of children's books about the end of life. And you can see on the right, this is a t-shirt she picked out at a last summer during a trip to a secondhand store. And it shows grinning Day of the Dead Kalaga riding in a car while playing the guitar. And this is by far her favorite shirt. And I can't wash it fast enough for her to wear it again. So my daughter is, by all accounts, fascinated by death. And so this is what we do. We go to the cemetery a lot, and it's not because mommy pushes her to do it, it's because she demands it. We've had, conversations that go something like, do you want to go for a hike today? No, I want to go to the cemetery. Every time we drive by the cemetery, we have to drop in. So this happens to be a place where both of her grandparents, great-grandparents, are buried. And her interest in cemeteries stems from this place of deep curiosity. So she has this desire to understand death in ways that she finds accessible. So when we go to the cemetery, she needs me to read all the names of the people and how long they lived. So we go row by row. I read all the names, and she plucks, I guess you can't see it on this one. She plucks like tiny flowers, puts them on the grave markers, and really thinks about what dead people can and cannot do. So, and this happened even when she was 2.5. She would talk to me about how dead people can't talk, they can't eat, they can't drive. And in her mind, death is really this inability to engage with the world as you once did. So, a self frozen and undone. But within this frozenness, this stillness, she still senses a presence, something enduring, that somebody who welcomes flowers and visitors. Right when you get to the cemetery, there is this very visible marker covered by a rock and a golden stone that has a grave of a tiny infant that was buried there. In this, there's a little placard that says that the infant was left at a train station and was deceased, and so never, I don't think ever lived, but was people pooled some donations and have put like beautiful little markers on this grave, and it's very clearly a children's grave, and people leave toys and all kinds of stuff. And when I told her about this story, afterwards, we went home and she crafted something for this baby. And then we had to go back and we had to give our gifts, which was actually in like a little gift bag. And she had written like tiny, I mean, she can't write yet, but she had like written her name on a little note card and put like tiny little gemstones and whatever she could find. So, when we drive by cemeteries, she points out that there are cemeteries. She keeps a running list of the deceased that she wants to light candles for in the church close to my parents' house where we go, including people, fictional people, like the mother of Pippi Longstocking and other characters from, stories that are deceased. So, from stories. And all of this, I mean, as a parent, there are times when I worry, when I'm like, am I raising a more morose child? But as a parent, grandparent, or an educator, you know that each situation with children brings new options of how to react in a new moment, right? So, I didn't need to tell her there was a dead baby under that big rock near the entrance of the cemetery, but I chose to do that. Why? So, as adults, and I think parents especially, many of us feel perhaps an instinctive desire to protect children from potentially hard information, from upsetting truths, from frightening information, even. And many people think that children are too young, too immature, too incapable to truly understand something as complex as death. But inadvertently, that kind of avoidance and protectionism may actually perpetuate isolation, fear, regrets, and that can really backfire. A 2023 University of Bristol report, a study found that proactive grief education outside a traumatic event, and I think that's also key, can really make children feel less anxious about death. And not to say all children are anxious about death, but studies have shown that even very young children have a concept of death and benefit from talking about it and having their questions answered, right? And not along the lines of, oh, do you have any questions, but what questions do you have about death? By contrast, avoiding these conversations can actually leave children to imagine the worst and to struggle later on with what's called unresolved grief, which has been linked to depression, decreased academic performance, substance use, and even suicidal ideation. So if we aren't talking about death, we aren't saving kids from anything. And this may sound a little counterintuitive, right? Because we have all these cultural stories about, when an animal, a pet dies, you send them to a farm. They're sent to a farm upstate, right? We have so many fantasies that we engage in with kids that allow them to never even know and learn that people die. This topic has never been more relevant because according to the Population Reference Bureau, the number of Americans aged 65 and older is projected to rise from 58 million in 2022 to 82 million by 2050. That's a 47% increase. That means more children will witness the decline of people close to them, experience grief firsthand, and wrestle with the complexities of saying farewell and what that means. Yet our culture continues to struggle to provide children with approachable frameworks to make sense of these experiences. Rather than shield children from death, we should be willing to help them develop the skills and language to form their own relationship with it and to normalize conversations around death and better prepare them for losses to come. Because sooner or later, they will have to confront death, as if through the death of a grandparent, a pet, or somebody else who's close to them. Rights-based developmental models from psychology recognize that children have a right to participate in decisions that affect them and to receive information about matters of concern to them. And that includes dying and serious illness. When children are given the chance to learn about what is happening to them, they tend to feel valued and they tend to feel included. And grief and child life experts I've consulted for this project have really imparted that this open child-focused communication can really promote trust. And they don't like to use the word age appropriate because there's no such thing as being age appropriate, right? It depends on the child. It depends on what your child can kind of handle. So, and what's really key here is offering children choices about how they want to be involved, both in terms of understanding or learning about the end of life and being involved when somebody close to them dies and specific things they can do, right? And that really helps them develop the sense of agency and control in this very uncontrollable situation, even for adults, right? So how can we best equip children with the tools to make sense of these experiences? This is something that I am increasingly thinking about now, while I still, I'm very much still involved with end-of-life advocacy, medical aid and dying. But part of my professional life has also now shifted to really thinking about this question. And just to illustrate, and I talk about this a little bit in the article, this was about now a year ago. My brother-in-law called me in the morning. Once a day, my daughter spends the night at my sister's house, and then she takes her to daycare the next morning. And so one morning I woke up to a voicemail from my brother-in-law who somewhat contritely shared the story of how he had spent a long breakfast answering my daughter's questions about urns and caskets. And knowing my daughter, I wasn't surprised by this. Anybody else might have been alarmed, but this was very matter of course, yet par for the course for her. But so before he had finished his coffee, she asked him to see a dead person. And bless his heart, he soldiered on and he pulled up images on his phone of Pope Francis lying in state. And on the voicemail, he said, I really hope I didn't cross a line here. But she seemed really interested, and I thought, why not go there? And I was like, thank you. Anybody else might have shut this conversation down, but he didn't. So let me give you a concrete example of what death education with and for kids can look like. I assume most of you have heard about the concept of first aid. I hope all of you have. But there's also a concept called last aid, which is perhaps less well known. So, of course, first aid are all the measures you take to save somebody's life. And now there's a growing movement to also practice something called last aid. What is that? Last aid courses are aid people over the threshold between life and death. They are public education courses developed initially for adults, but are now also offered for kids and adolescents, taught primarily right now in Europe and Australia. And they started in Germany. They were developed by a German palliative care physician called Georg Bollig in 2008. And the first courses were held in Norway in 2014 and in Germany and Denmark in 2015. And they try to lessen the fear and anxiety that frequently accompany taking care of somebody who's dying and talk about how you accompany that person by turning towards the dying. And they help children and empower children to realize that they can be actively engaged in that care of the dying, and that they don't need to be afraid of somebody who's dying, which often happens with kids, right? There's a little bit of an aversion, maybe not to death itself, but to the person that's dying. Of course, it's very important to respect children's boundaries around all of that. And of course, it depends on their level of comfort. And I encourage all of you to I pasted a web link here in the bottom. Feel free to put it in the chat. There's actually an English version of the site, Letzte Hilfe is Last Aid. So this class is taught in 4 different modules, and it has been adapted for children and adolescents and been taught in schools, and not as part of a curriculum, but an extracurricular, as part of different kind of forms where kids get together and learn about new things. So module 1 talks about dying as a part of life. And these are conversations and videos that where children are encouraged to express their thoughts and feelings about the end of life, and share how they imagine death, what happens during death and dying. And they also then are taught about the process of dying and what that looks like, for whom and how long it can take, and just kind of basic questions around how to recognize when somebody is getting close to the end of their life. One second. Module 2 covers preparation and decision making. So children and adolescents learn about support services and networks available for people at the end of life. So the meaning of what powers of attorney, advanced care, healthcare directives, et cetera, why those are so important. And the third module focuses on relieving or alleviating suffering. So it explains how dying individuals may experience symptoms such as shortness of breath, nausea, pain, and how these can be treated. And they learn how to practically do some of that help themselves. So, for example, in cases of dry mouth, how you moisten the mouth using swabs and things like that. And I wanted to show you a little bit of an excerpt of what that looks like. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and share it again to show you on a different screen. Let's see if we can figure this out. Let me pull this up here. Okay, and share screen. 1 second. And show. 1 second here. Here. Hopefully this will work. I make this full screen. 1 second. Here. Okay. Can everybody see that? Okay, let's hope that we play that. So this will be in German, but I'll just show you 45 seconds of it, and maybe you'll just get a sense of the visuals.
Mundpflege. Die fällt am Lebensende oft schwer, kann aber Lebensqualität bringen. Wie das geht, lernt die Gruppe mit Schaumstoffstäbchen. Eingeweicht in Säfte oder Brause sollen diese den Mund befeuchten und den Geschmackssinn anregen.
Du musst draufbeißen oder so, glaube ich. Wir machen das vor allem, dass die einfach wissen, ich kann was tun. Und das ist nur ein Beispiel, was man in so einer kleinen Übung ausprobieren kann, um die Angst zu verlieren gegenüber Schwerkranken.
Also für mich war das gar nicht schlimm, aber ich fand es nur ein bisschen unangenehm wegen dem Schwamm, aber es war nicht schlimm.
Wenn das eine Person ist, die man lieb hat, dann macht man, denke ich, alles für die. Ja,
Ja, ich kann es mir auch vorstellen, das auch mal bei meinen Eltern dann irgendwann mal zu machen oder so.
So the kids are basically saying they can imagine doing that for their own parents. And it was a little weird at first, but they really like this idea of being able to help somebody with even these kind of like small practical gestures. So I am going to stop sharing and share again. Okay. So module 4 talks about saying goodbye. So what happens after death? What types of funerals are there? And this module teaches children about grief and how to cope with it. And again, this course really helps children feel included in this process. For example, by placing something in a coffin or an urn for the deceased. And again, really gauging children's level of comfort here with being involved. And so far, this course is not yet an integral part of school curricula, but it's being offered in many different settings and has broadly resonated with kids and young adults. And in fact, when I was looking at this earlier, just last month, the Canadian Hospice and Palliative Care Association has started offering this public education course this year. I'm not sure if it's found its way to the US yet. I haven't been able to find anything on that, but maybe it's time to bring that course to the US. It would be very interesting. So Georg Bollig, the founder of this concept and who developed all these classes, is very active. And it might be really, really interesting, perhaps even to have him talk about this in the States, which I'm sure he probably has started doing, but I haven't seen any place in the US that has started offering these classes, but they are available in English. So, and I wanted to invite all of you to do a quick reflection exercise for a few moments. And I want you to invite you to think about other ideas you have or that you have piloted of, or maybe you've not even really thought about this, of how else we can make death seem less scary for kids. So let's take 2 or 3 minutes and just old-fashioned pen and paper or on your screen or something and write down a couple of ideas or things that you've tried out of how you think death could be made a little less scary. And with the permission of the moderators, maybe a couple people or a few people can share. Okay. So I will time you. Okay, you can start. And 1 more minute. All right, so thank you so much. David, do you want to MC a little bit or people raise their hands to see who wants to share?
Sure. And we're a little limited in terms of because we're screen sharing. So, but I think people pop up. If you can raise your hand, then I think you'll pop up to the top if you'd like to. Oh, well, Alan's clapping, so maybe that's a thumb raising. Alan, go ahead.
Really? Well, I just have to say I'm a great fan of Coco, the Disney movie that was has been out and has become a tradition around Day of the Dead, and it explains things. I'm a great fan, and having gone to Oaxaca and experienced Day of the Dead live, it was quite an experience that really does involve children in Mexico. It's a family event. And I
Mhm.
have never been so well educated on how the people in Mexico treat that time and how they involve children. And I think it definitely would be a prototype for something we could do here.
Thank you. Day of the Dead is such a great example. And I think somebody else put that in the chat. Um, yeah, other ideas.
As people think about this a little bit, Anita, we earlier this year we had Dr. Nadia Tremonti, a pediatric palliative care physician, speak, and I encouraged her to show up to your talk tonight because she is raising two daughters and tries to take opportunities to learn how to deal with loss and grief from the mundane of toys breaking
Mhm.
to the death of pets and taking those opportunities to engage thoughtfully with them about their feelings, about their ideas around that kind of loss. And I think there's lots of mundane things that we can do with children in the day that just arise naturally.
Okay. And I see here in the chat somebody put celebrate the life of those who have passed in joyful celebration.
Mm,
Right? Explaining death as part of the cycle of life, and even something like including children for funerals, right?
yeah.
Don't leave them at home. Like go take your children to funerals. Liv has their hand up.
Right, one sec. Let me just put my hand down. Yeah, I was gonna kind of add to that because one sec, let me turn my camera on. So I'm of Mexican and Jewish descent. And so, I grew up in a cancer ward because my grandfather was dying of cancer at the time. It didn't disturb me. Even though I knew people around me were dying, I went to a lot of funerals growing up, but I think part of it was because of that cultural background. We didn't do Day of the Dead, but there was just this, okay, death is a fact of life, it's a part of life. There wouldn't be life without death, and most of the time, like Mexican funerals, I don't know if anyone's ever gone to one, but it's almost like a party. So I just grew up with the idea of like, okay, if you ever plan your funeral, this is your, you know, leaving Earth party, basically. The
Mhm.
other thing I'd like to add with the Jewish descent is kind of links up to that is almost this there's this saying when someone passes away with within Judaism of may their memory be a blessing.
Mhm.
So, I think that those two things go together in which like, I don't know, maybe have your sit down with your kid and ask them, okay, how did they, what was the good that they did in your life? What was it that you enjoyed about them? How was it, what are these things that we want to carry with us? How were they a blessing to you?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? I see New Orleans jazz funeral traditions. Listen and respond when they begin talking about missing somebody. Right. And really getting curious about that, right? And asking them um, about that and really inviting these conversations in. All right. So let's see. Um, Anybody else? Oops. Okay. Well, I'll tell you something I have started to do. Um, so one of my projects right now, and I've been working on it for a while. It's slow going, but I started putting together a children's book called Willa's Last Party, talking about parties, right? So this is just kind of a mood board that we're submitting to publishers. Um, but Willa's Last Party is essentially takes this idea of one last final party, a chosen goodbye for somebody who knows enough about the end of their life to know that they are dying. And having a so the in the book, which is written for ages 4 to 7, members of a community come together to love this woman Willa out. This is a this terminology of loving somebody out is something I learned doing my field work with medical aid and dying patients. Um, and they basically each get ready for what we know is Willa's last party, and they you kind of see the individual characters getting ready, and then at the end, people come to Willa's home, and they have this joyful celebration, but also a little bit of a somber celebration. She has this big speech. And then at the end, it's clear that she is going to die. She's not dying right at the party for with the kids there, but at the end, kind of everybody forms a circle, and there's a sense of reassurance, but also transience, and that she will no longer be there. Um, and so my agent and I started, you know, approaching publishers with this concept last year, and there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of intrigue. So far, I think it's hinged a little bit on the manuscript not being quite there yet in terms of really appealing to kids. And I've now completely rewritten it. Initially, I wrote it in kind of a general way where I thought, oh, this could be used for all kinds of goodbyes. I didn't even name death in the story because I thought, oh, maybe she's moving away or something else. And when I shared this with a grief life expert, she said, no, don't give parents or grandparents or educators an out. Make her actually use death, say that she's dying, and make this a tool for parents who want to have these conversations with their kids. And I thought, here we go. Here I am, a death educator lady who's been preaching about this stuff for years, and now I write a children's book without even mentioning the word death. And so I completely rewrote it. Now it's clear from page 2 that she's actually dying. Not clear how she's dying. Is she using medical aid and dying? Does she just know she's dying? Is she on hospice? We don't know. But it's very clear, and she knows it, and she talks about that with her community, and all the kids know it. And it's now a very different story because when my agent first read it to her kids, they thought that Willow was moving away. And I was like, oh, that's great. It just is very flexible as a framework. But I think I was a little afraid that publishers would shy away from a book that is so clearly about death. But now in this next version, we're really leaning in and we're saying, yes, this is about death, and this will help you talk to your kids about death. So, um, okay. So how has all this openness about death and dying affected my own daughter? This is something I want to close with. So let me pull this up. So about a year ago, after my daughter and I buried a dead bee by the side of the road, right outside our house, she said something that caught even me off guard. She all of a sudden said, after we'd buried the bee, she was like, I like graves. And I was like, why do you like graves? And I was, there was a part, but sometimes there are times when I'm a little worried, that her fascination is going a little bit too far. And she kind of paced around our playground sandbox, hands on her hips, and she gathered her thoughts. And then she told me why. And then I made her repeat it again because I wanted it on video. So I'm going to play you the video of why she likes graves.
You like graves? Why do you like graves?
I like graves because I like the people in the graves.
That's why you like graves?
Yeah.
Okay.
So did everybody hear that? I like graves because I like the people in the graves. So of course everybody, always thinks their own kids are brilliant, but at the moment I was like, oh my God, she has this way of expressing her love for the departed, and just really her compassion for all human beings, right? So she still recognized human beings as human beings in these graves. And so rather than morbid fixation, her interest and fascination with death were really kind of an extension of her awareness that she was developing for those around her, for the world around her, for dead animals, for dead people, and things like that. So I wanted to read you a final passage from that initial article that I quoted in the beginning that just kind of sums up where we are with all of this. And so it came as no surprise when, at Thanksgiving of last year, my daughter decided to become a vegetarian. On our way to a friend's house for dinner, I mentioned we'd be eating a turkey, and my daughter's eyes grew wide. She had only known about turkeys from picture books and the occasional wild one on our travels to California. Her eyes grew wider still when I assured her the turkey was dead. Absolutely not. That evening, she scooted the turkey around on her plate, refusing to eat any of it. For weeks afterwards, she was on to me. What else had I been keeping from her? She audited everything she ate, asking whether it was dead. Contrite, I opened our fridge and staged a literal lineup of all the meat products in it. That settled it. She was done eating dead animals. Her curiosity about death had grown into an ethics of care. And so from then on out, whenever we would go to our little grocery store right outside here, she would walk through the aisles and be like, that's a dead animal, that's a dead animal, that's a dead animal. And go up to the butcher's counter and be like, dead animal, dead fish. And so she did that for a while, and then I was like, okay, we gotta stop doing that and freaking people out here. But so that's where we are now. Her fascination is unabated. She's now been a vegetarian for 1.5 years. Oh, let me plug in my laptop. She's not going back. She often will ask me, and I've kind of become a vegetarian by default. Because when I now eat around meat around her, she'll be like, "Oh, you like dead animals? You like eating that?" And I'm like, "Well, not if you put it that way, but yeah." Um, so this is where we are.
You like
Oh, we already had that. So that's the end of my presentation. I have other things that we can talk about, specifically as it relates to medical aid and dying in kids. I attended an amazing presentation by a child life expert on that topic. I can also answer questions more generally about medical aid and dying. Please feel free to reach me. This is my website and my email. And I would just kind of like to open it up for discussions, thoughts, impressions, critiques. There we go. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much.
B, did you want to start?
Yes, I do. My father was a very well-known leukemia researcher and clinician. And so I dealt with death very much as a child. People came from all over the world to be treated by him. But when my cousin, my very close cousin, she was 11 and a half, died, I was sent to play in the park when the funeral happened. And when my beloved grandmother died, when my beloved grandmother died, and was put first in assisted living, I was kept from her because I was supposed to remember her how she was. Then I came across another cousin who, when the same thing happened, their daughter became a candy striper at the place where the grandparent was ill. And I had two reactions. One of them was, I'm cheated. I have been cheated. And the other one was, I'm strong enough to handle this. So I really applaud what you are doing. And your daughter has a lot of strength. And so do other children. And so I applaud that greatly. It took me a while to, well, actually, I had another grandmother, a step grandmother, who threw her own party, and she knew she was dying. And that was the healing and turnaround for that whole series of events.
B, thank you so much for sharing that. I have a question. What's a candy striper?
Oh, a candy striper is a volunteer in a hospital or a hospital. They're called that because they wear striped red and white uniforms. They bring books. They bring pillows. They do all sorts of things like that. They
Okay.
talk at bedside.
Okay. I
Yeah.
was literally imagining somebody who passes out candy, but that's probably not it. Um, it's so interesting because your story really resonates with what I've heard from child life experts who say the only time that children express regrets around this is when they're not included, when they haven't been given a choice to be involved, when they haven't been able to make decisions about their level of involvement, and somebody just made the decision not to include them. And this is really when you get unresolved and complicated grief in children who have not been trusted, as you said, to handle this, right? And to be kind of who have an adult who cares about them to explain stuff in their language and to gauge how they want to be involved, right? Yeah. Thank you. Karma, I think you had your hand up.
Oh, sure. A couple things in the chat I wanted to just notice. Maybe people remember when Tucson had Tunidito, my little nest, and it was a children's hospice that I worked at back in the early 90s and did a lot of training. The reason I bring that up is because, of course, Tucson has been really for a long time sort of ground zero for a lot of innovation, which is, Roots and Roads is part of that. But then, of course, Tucson gave us our own All Souls procession, as whoever said, we need something like that around here. This is also a chat link I put in case people don't know about that Tucson has. And then I put in the PBS link to the Monarch documentary because there's a lot of discussion in that PBS documentary about the role of monarchs in the All Souls in Mexico and the very ecological fact of monarchs returning on All Souls season, and that's why the monarch butterfly is a symbol for that, is just an ecological fact. And so the reason I say all that, and I put in the Coco movie also, it's a really good one, is since my work again in the late 90s in Oregon, some of those first cases of death with dignity, of course, we were including children and still do in as I think you said, Willa's last party is what you're calling it, which of course is wonderful. And how to, have children involved in those last parties when it's a loved one that is going to, maybe partake of their pudding or whatever's going to happen. So in the chat, I put another link. Someone said jazz band. There's an all Saints Go Marching In. It's an authentic jazz funeral. And the reason I say that is because for the children, always the music, always the singing, always the way to anchor nature. And again, Tucson is on the map for some of the earliest work done around eco-psychology was at Prescott College in Arizona and Prescott and at the Tucson satellite. We had students from all over the country coming to Prescott College because we had a thanatology program with eco-psychology. So we were really old days looking at the role of nature and wilderness therapy and expressive arts therapy. It just the early 90s was a dynamite place to be in Tucson. So yeah. Right.
Yeah.
There, but so I don't mean to over chat, but I love what you're doing. I just wanted to put resources in there for people because there is a death cafe for youth. There's a kind of school social work version of that. And so thank you so much for sharing this inspiring work and this wonderful daughter that you have. I like the people in the grave, she says. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karma. Prescott has always been at the forefront of some really cool things. I actually went to high school in Sedona, out of all places. So I have a deep love for Arizona. Verde Valley School, I don't know if anybody knows it. It's in Oak Creek Village, not directly in Sedona, but right near Cathedral Rock. That was our backyard. Um,
Well, that explains a lot
so
about your anointing then, my friend. I'll just say that, you
near the
you didn't
vortex.
grow up in Indiana. You know,
No.
that's awesome. So there you go.
Um, But I wanted to say a couple of things about MAID. So this presentation I attended, two presentations. One was actually at the MAID House in Toronto last year, and they spoke about how when how do you involve children in MAID? That can be potentially very dicey, medical aid and dying, right? And a grief expert for children really talked about it's again gauging their level of involvement, right? Do you want to be in the room when this is happening, or do you want to bring over a card? What do you know about medical aid and dying? And just really explaining the process, and 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 again, and this person really said she's never in her life had a situation where somebody was ungrateful for having been there, but only sad when they weren't able to be there. So really um, really including children in, or at least in the decision of whether or not to be there, how to be there. Do you want to give grandma a stuffed animal, or do you want to do this? And this is what I'm kind of trying to do in the book as well, is show some of this like level of involvement with what do you want to bring to Willa's last party? Is it a koala? Is it like a little stuffed animal, which is happens to be my daughter's favorite stuffed animal? Or is it this or is it that? So was there anything else I wanted to say about that? No, I don't think so. Okay, Alan, you're next.
Hi, I just have to say I've been involved with hospice and palliative care for many years here in Tucson, and really got into the history of things coming from the Pacific Northwest with their law, with medical assistance in dying. Actually found my calling in going to the Professional Pharmacy Association in the state and
Mm-hmm.
discuss death and dying and involvement of pharmacists and other people in hospital settings and other places, because many people had the wrong information that they got from the media. Very into that, very interested in that, followed it for a long time, and I still do. Your book came along and really sort of completed what I knew about the procedures and the laws and the things in Oregon and Washington, and put the human side to it. And I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoyed your book for that, because that was the part that was always a big hole. We've got the facts, we've got the numbers, and they do a great job in documentation of that. But your book put another end to that I hadn't really seen before, heard before. I think people need to read the book, needless to say. And then I was struck by Dr. Green's book from Canada,
Mm-hmm.
which is even another dimension, because they have active aid in dying, medical assistance in dying, where they actually show up at the individual's house, and their laws are such they can actually provide medication directly to the family member or whoever might be the person under the care of her. She was the first person in Canada to actually make house calls and do that. And I think between both of your books, it really puts a human touch to this whole controversy. And I think
Mm-hmm.
people would do really well to bolster their background in this by reading your book and her book too. Maybe the future will be nicer to us with the laws and the regulation being more uniform as they are in Canada than they are in the United States right now.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's so lovely to hear. There are some advocacy organizations in Arizona that are trying to pass laws, or a law, a medical aid and dying law in Arizona. I think I don't know if it's in the legislative session this year. I would have to go back and check. But of course, Oregon and Vermont are now open to non-residents. So anybody can, who has the means and ability to travel can make use of their laws, which wasn't the case when I was doing my research, but now has since changed. So we're really seeing a lot of movement, especially with New York and Illinois coming, and Delaware actually coming on board this year. And well, New York and Illinois will come on board later this year, but they've been approved. But at the same time, we are also seeing a concerted effort by opponents to strike these laws from the map altogether. There's a series of coordinated lawsuits in federal district court in California, Delaware, and Colorado that try to eventually make their way to the Supreme Court to wipe death with dignity off the map altogether for everybody. So that's something that proponents are very concerned about, especially with the current makeup of this Supreme Court. That if a case were to make it all the way up there, then we would be done with medical aid and dying in the United States, especially with one of the judges being so anti-medical aid and dying and having written an entire book about this, Neil Gorsuch. So we'll see what happens with that. Everybody is watching these court cases very carefully. But meanwhile, states are kind of continuing to pass their own laws. And there are lots of states that are pretty close. Minnesota, Massachusetts has another bill this year. Wisconsin will have in 2027. So yeah, so it's the opposite of abortion, where it used to be, a federal right, and now it's a state right. And with medical aid and dying, it was always a state right since 1997, when the Supreme Court decided there's no constitutional right to medical aid and dying. But each state can make their own determination on that. So anyway, thank you for plugging the book, Alan. That's so nice
Anita,
to.
I wanted to say too that New Mexico, who also has a medical aid and dying law, they do not have a residency requirement, just like the other states. So that's a possibility for folks from Arizona. And there's actually, Silver City is just 3 hours away by drive from the Tucson area. So people are beginning to avail themselves in Arizona, because I don't think that it's ever made it out of committee or even a hearing in committee here in our state legislature to pass this law.
Yeah. And of course, there are some complications with using a medical aid and dying law in another state. And one of them is that you have to be physically in the state for your appointments and for taking the medication, because otherwise you could get into real trouble. But anyway, that's a different story. Mary.
Hi, I'm changing the topic a bit and going back to children. I'm a court-appointed special advocate in Pima County. I don't know the percent of children who have lost their parents because of drug overdose. It would be interesting to take a look at that in terms of the foster care system in the state of Arizona. I would really wish that we had a very systematic process for how we deal with our children that are foster kids who have lost their parents and are now in the foster care system because of a drug overdose. I have one of those children for the last 4 years. I've had the privilege of being with her. One of the things I did pretty quickly after I got attached to her is someone outside of DCS talked to me about the deceased mom's Facebook account. And I went on that Facebook account and I thought, well, before that disappears completely, it might be nice to take some memories off of that for this child for some time in the future. So she would see photos and she'd see thoughts in terms of how her mom felt about her life. Because there's not much other family there, to tell you the truth. So I did that and I put together a photo album of all that. I haven't shared that. And I've had this child for 4 years. And one reason I have not shared it is retired 46-year public school educator, but I'm not a grief counselor. And I'm trying to find my way in terms of how much, if she wants to talk about the death of her mom, I never stop her from talking about it. But I keep hoping that there would be more something systematic for folks that are trained in grief counseling with children to work with our kids, especially in the foster care system, who have lost their parents. And there's a bit of it, but there's not a lot of it.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of time talking to kids about boundaries and not enough time dealing with maybe some of the reasons why we need to talk about boundaries with kids.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that. And when this photo album will be shared. I feel like if she finds a, as we always call it, the forever home, that's where it belongs. And it belongs with that family to be able to sit down and talk to her about that. But we haven't, after 4 years, we still aren't at that point. And I can't believe I'm so alone out there with this child in the state of Arizona or any other state. So, any suggestions?
I'm sure the group, I'm going to open it up to the group in a second. One thing that immediately comes to mind, I don't know if you've heard of the Dougie Center. So they are out of Oregon, I believe, and they specialize in grieving children. And so they have a lot of resources on their website about how to approach this topic. And they're amazing with those kinds of things. And I think they have manuals and all kinds of stuff, storybooks. It's often through stories, right? And
Yes.
and also I mean, there are some schools of thoughts where, that say, oh, let children bring it up themselves. But you can also bring it up, right? You can also invite this conversation and invite her curiosity um, by saying, do you want to see pictures of your mom? Or do you remember what she looks like? Or do you, and then, because I have this thing here for you, and then that could also spark the conversation, and then just see what kinds of questions she has, and let her kind of take the lead by opening this up for her, right? And not necessarily putting the onus on her to waiting to bring it up, but be like, hey, do you have any questions about your mom? I have some pictures we can look at, or would you like to look at this with me? I know it takes so much, right? It feels like such a potentially hard thing to do. Um, but yeah, check out the Dougie Center and see what's
Thank
there. Alan, you have your hand up.
Alan, did you want to say something too? You wanted to add, please? There you go.
My name's Alan Cunningham. I worked and volunteered for 10 years for Children to Children, which is a Dougie Center based grief group in Tucson. It has now been merged with Tu Nadito. And they still do grief support groups for children aged 3 through 18, as well as the adults in their life. So that's for Grace, Tu Nadito, and give them a call and see if just let them talk with you. But that is a resource in Tucson for children who have experienced a death of a loved one. And in my 10 years, I need to say, one of the things I heard more often than not from children was they wouldn't let me go to the funeral. So we need to make sure that somehow our funeral people get taught and learned that it's important to encourage people to allow their children to come to the funeral, because children want to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Jerry put something in the chat, said, how can we help our loved ones, kids, nieces, nephews who aren't as comfortable with death themselves become more comfortable talking about it with their children? Do you have just some basic suggestions that to begin this?
I think storybooks. I think stories are always a great way to find your way into challenging conversations. And this is certainly there are some great children's books. Well, it depends on, what age they are. I'm going to show you a couple of my favorites. One second. There's actually a book that I don't yet have, and I can't believe I have it. It's called When Dinosaurs Die. And it really goes into detail on how exactly you can frame certain things in death with children. This is one of my favorites. It's called Ida. Oh, it's too blurry. It's called Ida Always.
Hmm.
It's about two polar bears at the New York Zoo, New York City Zoo, and one of them dies, and the other has to go on living and without her, and really misses her. And it's beautifully written. It's very accessible, and it's talks about grief. It talks about memory and loss. So this is one of my favorites. Some people mention The Invisible String, although I don't think The Invisible String is great for talking about grief. It's too implicit in death. It doesn't really talk about death per se. It's a good book to talk about, how we're still connected to the people we love through invisible strings and stuff like that. But it's a little bit to make that really about death, you'd have to make, your own jump there. But that's one. There's Granddad's Island is another one that talks about a grandfather going away to an island, basically, kind of metaphorically. The memory box is one that talks about how to carry our dead, how to with keepsakes and things like that. So those are some, but definitely check out When Dinosaurs Die. It's I think from what I've seen, it's painted as a cartoon. But I need to get it. Maybe I'm misremembering. David, you look like no, it's not a cartoon.
No, no, I don't. I'm not familiar with. I've heard of it
Oh,
before, but
okay. Yeah. Yeah, check out that book. There's also Freddie the Leaf. This is an older book. This is about a leaf that is on a tree and eventually decides to let go. And it's beautifully written, but the illustrations aren't as engaging. They're just pictures of leaves. And so I tried to read this to my daughter, and she's like, "Nah, this is not what I expect." And so maybe once she's a little older, certainly the narration is beautiful and works on so many levels and transience and impermanence, and it's gorgeously written. But it's just the imagery is not there, at least not for my daughter. When she's older, she might like it, but yeah.
have you seen that or read that reflection meditation by Thich Nhat Hanh about the red leaf that he sat and watched for? All right, I'll send it to you afterwards. Your daughter might like that as well. No
Okay,
illustrations, but it's a great meditation.
thank you, Jennifer.
I really love the cemetery conversation about your daughter and talking about other family members. Well, I'm the weird auntie who took my 10-year-old niece to the cemetery, and we lived in Honolulu at the time. So there's the Chinese cemetery, which was beautiful and has food and incense and everything. And then there's like the missionary ones that are really old and some that still had these porcelain portraits on them. So my niece was about 10 and she wasn't really interested in much of anything. She's not academically minded or history, anything. But when we went to the cemetery, we did math. Like, how old was this person? And we were able to think about, okay, so we do some math. How old was this person? Were they little? Were they old? Oh my gosh, they're the oldest one we found. Oh my gosh, this was a baby. Oh my gosh, this one was my age. And then we would think about, like, okay, so what might their life have been like? What kind of story? So we created story around these people. Like your daughter said, she liked the people who are in there, but this was such an education rich environment. And she was really into it. She became interested in history. She saw math as a practical application relating to people. And it was really amazing. Her parents freaked out, but they got over it. So that became a thing she wanted to do with Auntie Jen. We went to funerals. We went to cemeteries. We did math. We thought about people. We thought about their lives and looked at some Hawaii history while we were at it. So I feel like there are fun ways to introduce something like a cemetery when it's not a family member or a funeral. It's rich with conversation. That's all. Just
Mhm.
weird auntie story here.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is really amazing. I mean, when my daughter and I travel, she just wants to go even to tiny cemeteries of just like a few graves. When she sees one, she's like, oh, we have to go. And and so when that story came out on WBR, most comments were really positive, but there are a couple comments that were like, what is this? Is child abuse? Why is this woman taking her child to cemeteries? She's way too young. Exactly all kind of the preconceptions that you have, children are too immature to understand. She's probably just parroting what her mommy's saying and all this stuff. And then one person said, "Oh, I bet these two are really fun at parties." But like really sarcastically. And then other people chimed in and said, "I think they would actually be really fun at a party." Um,
I have a question for Alan, if it would be okay, because I think I kind of understand, Alan, who you are in the pharmacy way. I have had a number of cases with voluntary stop eating and drinking, VSED, again, in specific states. It's complicated, but with children with children in voluntary stop eating and drinking, or just with the cessation of eating that can sometimes naturally occur, I wondered, Alan, I mean, maybe this is another webinar and maybe it's a question for Anita, I'm not sure, but it seems like there's disagreement on how much pain people might actually be experiencing in the VSED process, like literally sensory somatic experience of pain that people report is so widely varied. And so for the children to be seeing, well, we're not feeding or grandma's not drinking anything, or, I mean, do either of you have anything pharmacological or
I think
anything?
Dr. Handig needs to answer this one.
yeah. So this is actually something that came up in one of the webinars I attended. And so with Visa, that can be really hard to watch, right? Because you're seeing somebody exactly who's not eating and drinking. And with something like that, and including, some even some medical aid and dying deaths can be a little bit harder to watch just because of the condition the person is in. And so the expert that held the webinar said, before you expose something, before you expose children to that, show them a photo and say, this is what grandma looks like right now. Just so you know, before we go see her, this is what she looks like right now. And really explain to children what they can expect. Grandma might make funny sounds, or she has a hard time taking in air, um, and all of those, so that you're not having those conversations at the bedside, right? And to explain to them, her body stopped working, and so we're no longer feeding her, or she doesn't want to be fed for XYZ reasons, and just really answer all their questions before you attend to somebody um, doing those final stages. I think that's really important because it can be shocking, even for adults, to see somebody who is
Well,
undergoing
and
his children.
conflictual. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but the conflict around voluntary stop eating and
Yeah.
drinking, especially if it's happening in maybe a memory care or,
Yeah.
A more neutral setting. That's why I asked about the pain, but I noticed that Liv has a question here that she's asking about specific resources. So I did put a bunch of resources, geeky stuff in the chat, Liv, if that's helpful, but ask your question. I can't read it without my glasses.
And just one thing about pain too, that also depends so widely, right? I mean, you have to have such 24-hour care when you undergo visa. It's somebody who turns you to avoid, you know, bed sores and stuff like that. And it also depends on how close you are actually to the end of your life when you start visa. If you're too far, then it can be potentially very protracted and painful. So it's also, if yeah, anyway, so that's kind of a different topic, but certainly very valuable to think about.
Anita, maybe you said this and I missed it, but how early do they start that last aid education in the schools?
Ah, um, so I think at school age is what I saw. So 6, 7. In Germany, that's 6 or 7.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if they do it earlier than that. I would have to look
Mhm.
at that.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great that it's that early. Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that also, I mean, in Germany, they also do sex education really early with kids.
Mhm.
Sometimes even earlier than that. And so and initially I was like, oh wow, that's surprisingly progressive. But there tends to be this like realism around how you treat children here. And so I'm not surprised that they bring death education into schools. I mean, it's not part of the curriculum. Um, But I certainly, I mean, I hope my daughter's schools, if we're still here, then will do something like that. Because right now, I'm not aware of that really being part of anything to taught in schools, almost
Hmm.
anywhere, basically.
Okay.
I mean, just talking for like the English speaking world. I don't know what it is like in Mexico, but
Yeah. And did you see that in Live Within, are there end of life and preparation resources for children with terminal illnesses? Are you familiar with resources for that?
oh, are you talking? Oh, sorry, are you talking to
No,
Liv?
no, I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was just put in the chat, and she
Oh,
was
I see.
asking about resources for children with terminal illnesses.
Yeah. So similarly, the Doggy Center also has a lot of resources around that, I think.
Okay.
Um, and there are the Canadian in Canada, there are a lot of I would have to find it and get back to you, but there are basically these booklets that you can use to talk to children about um, death, dying. When a loved one has an illness, it's called Me and My Illness or something, and then they and their illness, and et cetera, et cetera. So it walks through different scenarios of who becomes ill and how to talk to children about what happens when a body stops working and things like that. And because children often have, ideas around that we might not even think about, right? So, for instance, am I going to get sick if I see grandma who's sick? Or can she get better by eating her vegetables? Or stuff like that. And just how do you respond to those questions, right? And as this study I mentioned really also shows, any child has a conception of death and dying. They may not have told anybody about it, but if you ask them, they know they have an idea of,
Mhm.
or they have like an imagination of how they envision that or what that means, or um, but they are rarely asked to share that or process that, right? And so um, it's so good for that stuff to come up naturally.
We probably have time for one more question if anyone has something pressing that they would like to raise. A lot to think about, I know. This has been wonderful, Anita. Thank you so much for your honest reflections on some very challenging ideas of how we can do this. I think that what I love about what you're saying in so many different ways is that it's not about age appropriate, it's about child appropriate. And you know, part of it is taking their lead, as we say, but also it's not being afraid to raise those questions and conversations, and then it invites them to walk as far as they want to into those kind of conversations. I don't think every child is like yours who will be going to cemeteries, but I would suspect that there'd be a lot of children who would be interested in doing that if they had been given the opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, and how you engage with those things now, that is going to be so pivotal with how those children engage in the future.
Mhm.
And whether and their openness towards the end of life, because that's one thing, right? So things you learn as a child, you carry with you throughout your life. And having this openness and having this appreciation also, let's face it, for life's finality.
Mhm.
That's also something that children carry with them. And my daughter, she still asks me, regularly, um, how old people are, if that means they're going to die soon or things like that. And I'm trying to be honest with them, with her, and um, yeah, and sometimes she'll say, oh, we'll say, yeah, so and so is that old, and she's like, but I'm not that old. It's like about herself. I was like, no, you're not. You're still only 4. She's like, I'm not about to die. I was like, no, no, you, and not to say that she like runs around with this fear of death, but she's just trying to gauge, she's trying to understand. So they are closer to the end of the life, and barring something horrible, she is not yet there, But her mom will be there at some point, and so will her grandparents and other people she loves. So, yeah.
This has been a real blessing for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your thoughtful questions and your engagement and this amazing series. I was so honored to be a part of it.
Well, I'll follow up with you in the next few days. And I know maybe you could get a little sleep before your daughter wakes up. I don't know
I
what time she
definitely
gets
will.
going.
I'm
So
going right
thank you
back to
again.
sleep.
Everybody else gets to stay for a few more minutes so that we can, and Anita, you're welcome to stay too. We're going to talk about the upcoming sessions, but you can also go take a nap if you would like
I think I might have to go take a nap. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita.
Bye.
so much. Bye-bye now. All right, everyone. So we hope you join us again next month. It's going to be the second Thursday instead of the third. So please put that down on your calendars. It's going to be a week earlier than normal. We have Rachel Sass, who used to be a board member with Roots and Roads for a number of years. She is now with Northern Trust, and she's going to be talking about preparing for the unexpected, estate planning basics, and be able to answer our questions as well. So we hope you can join us for that. Please go online and register. And then in June, we have both Dr. Shaban Aaron and Dr. Laura Bradbury, who will be offering a session on reimagining grief support through a sociocultural lens. They have spent their careers researching what is effective grief support for folks, and they're going to talk about what it means to make it appropriate, culturally appropriate within the communities who we're serving, and the importance of that and what has actually worked well instead of a cookie cutter approach to grief support that we often find in many of the support groups that we attend. So we hope that you come and join us for that as well. That will be on June 18th. Do we have another one coming up? I don't think we have another slide for the next one. All right, but Jennifer's going to jump in now.
Yep, I'm just going to share that we do value your feedback. So if you don't mind, as you all log off from tonight's session, you will be prompted to take a survey. If you don't mind taking a couple more minutes out of your evening to fill those out, we would greatly appreciate it. We do share feedback with our presenters as well, so please make sure and complete that. And really, that was all I was going to share. So thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you. See you next month.
Take care, everyone.